Well, this looks as good a place to camp as any, Brian.
Are you sure you tried your door depth loader on each and every one of these buildings, Steve?
I did. And don't be a pussy, Brian. It's not that cold out here. And we should also be safe. We haven't come across anything on this road for over 4 weeks. Tonight should be no different.
Suppose you're right. But how are we going to pass the time till morning? It's early still, and I'm not at all tired.
Well, I've been saving up a story for when we've had to make early camp. Shame we don't have any fire sticks about. But we've at least got the warmth of my iron belly stove. Come closer, and listen carefully. There's a moral in this story that may just help us out of this mess.
Sure thing, Steve.
Well, the story goes like this. In a land where wishing still had purchase, a young fairy lass flitted about in the treetops with twittering birds at the cusp of sunrise. From up there, she could see that the ocean's horizon was about to birth a new sun. Presently, she could see its crown edging its way up. One blink later and it was suddenly high enough to cast a skinny, shimmering path along the dark water towards her, where raging river and tranquil bay meet, whose two waters then meander in their tidal travels up a jagged fjord, their brackish marriage overlooked on either side by a steep, dense and old mountain forest.
What a pretty setting.
She had just enough time to make it home. She bid fast farewell to the robins and grosbeaks and then she dived straight down into the thick cover of forest canopy. The overlapping shadows cast by the old forest's giant cedars were black as pitch. She kept to these darkest patches as best she could, but even they were beginning to wane. At the forest's edge, she could see a rising and enveloping white-lighted mist making its way west, in the very direction of her forest home.
Goodness. It sounds like she had better move fast. I heard that fairies should never be caught by the sun, like little vampires. And they both have pointed ears too.
The sun seemed to be climbing more rapidly than yesterday. And she now truly feared being caught out in the light. She flew faster and faster, and yet faster still. But the eerie, ashen mist from the east continued to advance, steadily, steadily. She fancied it was now coiled and nearly close enough so as to throw out its arms in front of her, to clutch her with its claws and draw her in tightly, so firmly as to squeeze her last ever breath from her tiny breast. Panic was nearly about to set in, but she somehow held her head. She was sage enough, though only a teenage fairy, to slow down, to make sure she could spot where the crucial nuts were in the biggest of trees. She could always duck into one of these tiny caverns and wait till dusk returned.
Fairies are smarter than I thought.
Her parents, however, would be more than worried to rise from their mountain moss beds this evening to find their second oldest daughter's nest of heather undisturbed. And once she returned, they'd be far more than cross with her. But better they be vexed as a volcano than to find her a pile of fair dust on the forest floor, expired by a mid-morning light that could penetrate even a wood as ancient and thick as this. She now reckoned it was best to slow right down. She would almost surely need to find a certain refuge. In fits and starts she flew homewards, hovering now and again to see if top particular knot in a particular tree was deep enough. If it had at least a recess or two. If it was decorated by a good, gnarly knob to conceal most of the entrance.
Oh my. She had better act quickly.
She looked to the east again to see how quickly the gleaming mist was gobbling up the night. And there, on an undulating trail that she'd failed to notice, fathoms beneath her, her eyes locked on the skyward goggles of a boy who'd been hunting for heron eggs. Twirling and whirling, she fell rapidly. Her wings were now totally toothless. But she managed at least to shift them just enough to angle her fall towards the darkest and softest spot around, in the shadows of three sister cedars, the tallest 3 trees in all these woods. They were so mighty that the wind carrying the seeds from which these trees grew may have been the same wind to carry the first people's very first words from mouth to ear.
This is sounding more and more like a creation myth, and it sounds almost as bullshit and colorful as ours. But I'm liking it, Steve. Go on.
The boy hadn't seen her land. But he heard the distinct and surprisingly heavy thud made when she fell upon the cedar's blanket of moist, decaying needles. He knew he had less than a minute to snatch her into his cedar bark basket before her full powers of flight and fancy were fit again. She could hear him rustling through a thick copse of stinging nettles, which grew in a perfect circle around the three old sisters as if to guard them from the annoyances of passing animals. What can I possibly do to bide a bit of time, she thought. Oh yes, yes. Of course, there's that.
What does this little bastard want with her, I wonder?
That's the gazillion-dollar question, Brian. And we'll have to leave that to your imagination for now. I'm tired and we should both get to rest before another long day on this road. But for now, keep in mind exactly what you're thinking. Humans. They're little bastards, to put it lightly. So keep that murder musket clasped tightly to your breast tonight. But try not to worry too much. Like I said, there's been no action on this road and so I wouldn't expect anything. But you can't be too careful.
Let those humans bring it, Steve. Like my dear old pappy used to say, see a human, eat him up, and all the day you'll have good luck. Hee hee ha ha hee hee ha hoy hoy.
Wise man, your pappy. I wish I could have met him. Anyhow, young chappie, I'll pick up where we left off when we make camp again tomorrow night. Night night, Brian.
Sweet dreams, Steve. Till tomorrow then.